Hello. My name is Randy Dixon. I'm Artistic Director of Unexpected Productions in Seattle, Washington. And we're going to be talking some improv today. So, topic I would like to start off, and feel free to write in your questions. I'll try to address questions. They don't have to be on necessarily the topic I'm talking about, but just a little improv discussion in general. But one of the things I thought I would start off with is to clarify a couple things about making your partner look good. And this is a term that comes from Keith Johnson, where he's always like, your job is to show your partner a good time and make them look good. And I've encountered this a lot with improvisers and improv students who kind of not misunderstand, but just don't fully understand what that means. And what I mean by that is the making your partner look good, right? Or taking care of each other, and is truly that. So what you're trying to do is, most people interpret it this way. They are inside their heads and they go, "Oh, I'm on a stage with a partner, and they made this kind of like weird, weak offer. Okay, I'll try to make them look good by over accepting that offer and doing that." But this skill is much deeper than that. What I'm implying is, or saying, is making your partner look good or taking care of each other is that idea of knowing who you're on stage with, knowing what their strong suits are, knowing games that they're good at, skills that they're good at, not necessarily just playing your favorite games that you're good at. But what you're trying to do is look around the room and kind of go, what kind of skill sets do I have? So if somebody's a really terrific singer and you don't feel like you're a strong singer, you could set them up for a song. And so it starts there, right? And it continues into other things. So the idea is to support the players in their offers from the very beginning. So there might be times when you are free falling with your scene partner, not knowing where the scene's going. Hopefully they don't either. Hopefully you're both being spontaneous and discovering something together. And you can both go to places and try to discover the core of the scene together. And like I always say, how do we know when we're doing good improv? Well, we're discovering stories and things that we never would have found on our own, which means I'm being a good collaborator. I'm taking care of the people I'm on stage with. And that goes from game choices to suggestions to pretty much everything. And if everybody's doing that, it follows in line with the kind of Spolin idea of follow the follower, which is if I'm making you look good, you're making me look good, we're making other people look good, then we're all just taking each other and we have each other's backs at all times. And overall, if we do that, right, the show is going to be good. And if the show's good, all boats rise with the tide. We get the credit, the applause, the laughter from a really responsive audience because we've taken the time to think through the skill sets before the show or who we're on stage with. And for some groups, if you're in a regular group that is somewhat, let's say, limited, but been together for a long time, you probably have a deep, deep understanding of the things that they are good at and things that either they don't like or don't feel that strong at. Now, all that being said, I'm talking about the show. In that kind of group or any kind of group, you also want to work, obviously, on those skills, games, theatricality, theatrical skills that are that you're weak at. So know what you're good at, but also kind of figure out what you're weak at and work on that. And again, with your partner's help. And hopefully they're going to want to make you look good. So if people come to me or something and say, "Hey, you're good at telling a story. I have trouble. Here's where I have trouble right at the beginning of a scene." My goal as an improviser is to make them look good by hopefully giving them a piece of advice or a skill or maybe even a game or something that they can then hold on to as they proceed forward. And again, in that situation, then your group just instantly gets better with the more skills you have. So, yeah. So, and I have found that people who do that or have done that to me well, I'll speak firsthand. People who've done that to me are the people I really enjoy working with because I know that they're very open to, to taking care of me, and I can then relax and be very loose and not worried about like they're going to make me look bad or they're going to, something horrible is going to happen. Something on stage, or I'm going to be set up in a way where the audience is not laughing with me, but the audience is laughing at me. And when you find a group like that you can really trust, it helps. But it's not just exclusively to a group that you've worked for years. I've seen groups of strangers do that. If that becomes the way that you play, then even strangers will love working with you because, wow, that improviser is making me look great. I feel fantastic working with that person, even if you don't know them, because we've all been in shows, I think, where in some cases we're meeting the person right before the show, or in some cases I've been in shows where I didn't even meet the person before the show. We just all went out on stage, and then at some point during the show or during a break or whatever, then we kind of got to know each other a little bit more, and then obviously after the show, debriefing and things like that, we got to know each other better. So yeah, so that's sort of that idea of making your partner look good. The other thing I really like about it is it takes my attention off myself. If I'm throwing my energy out again at my scene partners, then I'm thinking less about taking care of numero uno and more about taking care of the other people I'm on stage with. And to repeat myself, when they look good and I'm making them look good and they're making me look good, we all look good. So that's kind of enough, I guess, on making your partner look good. But I think it is, as you build the skill set, it requires some thought before you can actually do it. So what I mean is right before the show or during the warm-up, you need to, consciously make the thought and look around the room and kind of go, who's strong at what and how can I help them and how can I set them up? That kind of thing. So, yeah. And, and we all have seen, some of us have been in that show where that's not happening, where everyone's sort of taking care of themselves, or you're having to work around a strong personality driven improviser. It's going to happen. And, those kinds of improvisers get rewarded. And so it's going to happen. And so you also have to know where you are. And so how can you make even that aspect look good? How can I be a better improviser in a situation where I'm a bit challenged? And I'm a firm believer in, again, afterwards making that known, in debriefing and things like that, to make sure that it's understood. Because especially if you're in a group that's going to be improvising together again, it helps to have, to know where everyone is, where everyone stands on that situation. And the group dynamic does change over the course of time. So, the working dynamics of a group. And I think it's sort of like an organism. If that isn't happening in your group, then something's probably wrong. If it's kind of a static, it's always the same, or the people you're working with aren't evolving or developing, to me, those are kind of, that's smoke, and somewhere there's fire. So we might want to, refocus the group or focus on doing something else, which I've also had experience with, where improvisers started doing one format or one thing, and then for whatever reason, it wasn't working anymore. They got bored with it, blah, blah, totally shifted what they were doing, and reinvigorated the group, and went on and on and on. And some groups have done that several times, I think. So, yeah. So, something that came up in between, the last time I did this a couple of weeks ago, a couple of people asked about some story things. And to me, it's great to understand story structure, whatever story structure you want to understand, or understand multiple versions of how a story works. But it's another thing where once you have that skill, when you're on stage, you kind of want to throw that story structure not out, but just have it operating in the background. You're not trying to force a scene to follow the structure. What you're trying to do is see that the story on stage, as it's unfolding, is probably already following the structure. So you just sort of have to kind of look at it and go, where are we in this? Versus trying to make it go a certain way. Because one, that's a lot of work. Two, it's not organic to what's going on in the room. You know, the audience has expectations and putting out energy about what story, what scene they're going to see. The players have that same expectation. And in good improv, one of the things I love about good improv, and I'm sure you do too, is that it's in the moment. It's there in that moment, and it's not necessarily going to live outside of that room or after the show's over. But you can really enjoy it and really get, you know, whatever it is, be really moved, get a good laugh, see something that's thought provoking, and then it's like gone. So, genre shows, yeah. Genre shows are a interesting dilemma, and in that you have to do the work. And at least I think everyone kind of, not everyone, but I run across a lot of improvisers that want that genre pill, you know, and you know, like, oh, what are the 5 things I need to do, and it'll make it, you know, Tennessee Williams or whatever the style is. But and many years ago, when we first started doing genre work and stuff like that, and most of the group at the time sort of grew tired of, rather than saying like Shakespeare done really well by people who've read a lot of Shakespeare and studied a lot of Shakespeare, but rather seeing a show of people doing improv Shakespeare that they'd seen other groups kind of, so it was kind of a copy of a copy. And it lost something in that. And so at UP, I think we've created a philosophy around genres that you go back to your source material. And what's great about, you know, today is there's so many resources. And in many cases, in a lot of the other styles or other genres, other groups have tackled it. So you can also, you know, when I'm working on a genre, I try to go, well, who already did this? And I can write to them or talk to them like this or call or whatever and kind of say, you know, what are some traps you fell into that you didn't see coming? Because chances are, if they didn't see it coming, I'm probably going to walk into the same trap. So I ended up, you know, saving time, and in the end, also picked up a lot of tips on how to, you know, work in a genre, rehearse in a genre. But always go back to the basics. Start with source material. So I always go, you know, let's say we're doing an author, literary style. Gosha sent this in, and I see she wanted to do Vonnegut. We've done a Vonnegut show, and there are several people in UP who would be great resources, and maybe we can chat later or connect later. But let's take that as an example. Well, the thing is, you read, you don't want to read everything. You can, and I like to do that. But what I do is I start with, like, let's say, what are 3 Vonnegut books that everybody knows, or 3 Tennessee Williams plays, or 3 film noirs that everybody knows about. And you just start there, and you get kind of a nice base foundational understanding of the style. Then you start adding stuff. You add the next ripple of whatever that genre is. And then what I do is try to find resources about well, like with the Tennessee Williams is a great example with play analysis. So looking at critics, or in some cases, there's lots of master's theses and whatnot that will comment on a particular aspect of, say, a playwright like Tennessee Williams, or, you know, a film style like film genre. And I'm sure there's lots of that for Vonnegut. And I read those and look at those as a way of kind of getting my background in whatever the style is, because there's so many things that happen in all genre that are particular to that genre. And so to know why they did it that way then helps me understand a bit more about, you know, about the style. So one really easy one to think about is like in film noir, they do a lot of what I call the soap opera angle, right? Where you have multiple people in the frame, um, in like a medium shot or whatever. So you have the femme fatale down near closer to the camera, a guy in a fedora behind her, and then maybe someone else kind of lurking in the shadows, and it's all one shot. Well, part of that is because a lot of the film noirs were B movies, so that they had to get them out pretty fast. So it saves time if I don't have to necessarily do close-ups on everybody every time, right? So then I go, oh, that's why that's like that. So when we're staging that, and when we do film noir, we really take the time of how do we create that look for the audience from the stage, right? Oftentimes it feels weird because you're playing differently. So if I'm that person in front, right, oftentimes I'm talking and looking at the audience, even though I'm actually having a conversation with the person behind me. But that's just so that framing device works. And there's a ton of those. And I love finding those because when I know those, then it helps it, I always say, we have that phrase about, oh yeah, it tastes like chicken. I have the thing of like, oh, it tastes like Shakespeare, it tastes like Tennessee Williams, it tastes like film noir, it tastes like Vonnegut, where something will happen. I'll kind of go, there's a Vonnegut moment, there's a Tennessee Williams moment, right? And so when those start happening, then I know it's going well. The other thing is, the last thing I'll mention, there's a lot to go on. So again, maybe we can chat, or if people are interested, just contact me. But the last thing I'll do, which a lot of people don't do, but I find really illuminating, is I also find really bad examples of the style. So those less successful film noirs, there's a lot online that you can watch of, kind of weak productions of Tennessee Williams, and things like that. And I don't watch them because I want to laugh at them. I'm watching them because everything shows up in that. It's like, oh, this is where they're trying to do that thing that in a really good movie I don't notice, right? But I'm noticing it here because it's kind of clunky and out of the way. So I hope that gives you some more to work on. And yes, structure. Lack of structure. My approach is to try to avoid structuring anything. Like I said, you can understand, since I was just coming out of the genre stuff, understand the foundations of how the genre is built, but then again, don't make it happen that way. Just be aware of that. And in more open improv, I think structure's less important. You really want to keep it as loose and free as possible. And I find that when we have too much structure, you feel yourself either cornered in, like the form doesn't want to go that way, or the improv that night doesn't want to go that way, but you have to make it go that way because of your structure. And then another thing I would say is, I think in improv, there are a lot of groups that rely on structure, or they think that the structure again is going to save them. And some of you heard me talk about this before. So they think, oh, if we have this really cool structure, then whatever we put into it will be fine. And that's just not the case. And over the last few years, as those in UP can attest to who are here, I'm sure, what I focus on is this notion of improvisers rely on structure, or they rely on advancing, so adding plot point to it, even in a structure. For me, it's all about expansion. It's about emotional depth. It's what's at stake. What does this character want? What does it mean to them? What are they going to lose? Things like that. And not even so much with an eye towards they're going to achieve it or they're not going to achieve it. It's just literally what's the driving force behind this character. And so when stuff's not really working, I just go deeper into that and bring more to it. Because if the audience cares about my character, then they're going to get more invested. It's not just adding a plot complication, or again, relying on the structure and changing the scene just because that's what it says our structure should do. So, and it works, because my feeling is I want improvisers to be as free as possible on stage in whatever structure they're doing, that they don't feel pinned in or honed in too much, because to me that also not always, but it sometimes belies a lack of trust in the improviser. And what I love to do is to free the improviser, and have them be able to do whatever they want. And in some cases, like I remember doing some formats. It's happened to me, but in other forms where I've been directed, where years and years ago, I remember being in a rehearsal with Del Close in Seattle. We were coming out with some stuff to put up there, and he explained this thing, and we did it, and then he just sat there and watched it for a long time. And at the end of it, he just said, "Well, that was nothing like what I was trying to get you to do." And we were all like, "Oh," and he said, "But you know what? I like this better, so let's just keep going with this." And those are the kind of discoveries that you can do when you sort of cut the improvisers loose. And rather than, I've also been involved in those productions where somebody will say, "Stop, stop, stop. No, not like that. Here's what I'm going for." And that's okay. It can work. Obviously, if it didn't work, we wouldn't be doing it. But to me, I sort of like the notion that as you enter the stage, everything kind of goes at the background, and it's a tool for you to grab, but what's happening in front of you in the moment is the most important thing. And I can't be trying to think of where are we in the structure, or what am I supposed to do, or that kind of thing. And again, as with genre work and stuff I mentioned earlier about making your partner look good, lots of feedback. So lots of talking about it, what worked, what didn't work, why it didn't work. Sometimes I find in my structures, sometimes I'll have what seems to be a rule, and I'll just kind of go, that's just a bad rule, right? So let's just get rid of it, or not worry too much about it. So, so no structure, that becomes the key to it. And we've had a lot of success in other shows, and I've been in some of those shows, and they're a blast to just have that idea of not knowing, right? Which I think is why we get into improv, is sort of loving that not knowingness of it. Like, well, it could be great, could not be so great, but we don't know until we do it, right? Until we try it. So yeah. And let's see. Do invest in inventing structures, and maybe we should forms. I don't know what a better name for it would be. Hints, suggestion. I don't know. But structure is maybe the wrong term for it. I think, but in creating a structure, or also going back to the genre question, finding an interesting way to somehow use the style or genre as part of the overall piece that kind of sits on top of it is also nice to find. Again, don't force it, don't sit at home and playwright it all out, but discover it in the rehearsal, and sometimes we discover it in the performance. We go, that's great, the way that went really well, so let's try it again. Do a lot, fail a lot. I find that in developing forms, coming in with stuff and kind of going, well, that's not working, or it's not working because of this. Because if Steve Nekmanovich in Free Play talks, my favorite thing in it, I may have mentioned it last time, says I say it all the time. He has that thing that any rule or any game with more than 3 rules is a bad game. So when I go into designing structure or a game, I try to stick with that if I can. I come up with like 3 kind of basic things, and then do it. And then instantly when you're watching it, you see what's right and what's wrong with it. And so then it becomes no longer, I'm structuring the game, I'm going to write up this game. It becomes about problem solving. So it's like, well, that's not working. Well, what could we add a little bit of something to kind of make that right? And, or again, as I said in the earlier discussion, which you can watch on our page, somewhere down below there, I think. You begin design, for me, I begin design of long form stuff with or structure stuff with what do I want the audience to experience. So what do I want them to walk out with? A thought, having experienced something. Sometimes it's just having a good time. All right. And I always keep that in mind, but I never kind of integrate it into, it's like, what can I do to create that feeling? Not necessarily get hampered down by, I must have that feeling. Because sometimes as structures develop and cast brings in ideas, everyone's bringing in ideas, I hope, the show changes. The purpose of the show sometimes changes. We started out trying to do this and we ended up doing something else. Right. So, cool. Let's see. And I think if you set that up right, and all of this is kind of the same thing. I'm realizing that maybe you guys have an opinion on this. I'm sure you do. I'd love to hear it. It's about doing all the prep work and just being there so that you can let all that fall away, right? And you can trust your instincts and trust, because it's all informed by the skills you're building, the genre work you did, the trusting your fellow improviser and not relying on a structure to save me, And I'm lucky, and a lot of you are lucky as well, that we have a lot of good experiences with it. So, when I've done free fall stuff where there's almost no structure at all and it's a great experience, I want to do it again. I don't always get there again, but that's the thing. So you want to create that kind of space where you build over the course of time some good experiences. Of course, there are bad experiences, but I find that either way, we can do a show the next day. Hopefully, it's not something that just nope, we're done. Fold the theater. So don't be afraid of that, and then trust those experiences. Like, wow, I felt really great last time I did this way. I'm going to try to be that way again and be totally open to whatever's happening. So, and let's see. The most structure that was fun and artistically challenging. Boy. Well, I mean, I had a great time in. I mean, the reason why I'm having trouble answering the question is, of course, I love all my forms. So it might be better to ask the people who are in them. What they enjoyed. The thing I find interesting in my own forms is seeing who does them elsewhere, because then to me it's like, oh, well, they had fun or they enjoyed it, so they're going to do it there. And there are obviously forms I've done where we've done them once or twice or three times, and that's no one else does them, kind of thing. And sometimes it's just the timing's not right. Sometimes it's not that. But I also enjoy being in forms. And, I enjoyed Tony Beeman, who's on here, when we did, he directed Four Hearts, which again, almost had no structure. And it was really fun because it was working with a great cast, to any great eye. I felt like there was just enough that was given to allow us to work. And I also felt like, again, working with these great improvisers, that everybody really embraced it. And so when you get that, it's hard to beat, right? Because then you're part of the game and you're sort of, in a way, friendly fencing with each other. But everyone's trying to make everyone look good. Everyone's trying to take care of the show. Everyone's trying to be emotionally committed. And going to what I was saying earlier, played right into my hand personally, because it was more about characters and the relationships and about the depth, the expansion of what those characters were thinking and wanting and doing versus some sort of complicated plot, and that helped. We were hoping, I think sometime soon, we just did it a little while ago as a one-off at a festival, and then we're going to bring it back because we had such a good time with it and we got such positive feedback for it. So I'm hoping we can do that. It was going to happen around this time. So hopefully we can, push it forward to some other time. So And oh yeah, Chekhov was fun because that's what Chekhov is, right? Um, Chekhov is really about expansion, and then the easy metaphor, and uh, yeah, I'm just reading the comment. Yeah, I agree that it was great to have characters that are butting heads, but improvisers who are actually working together, which is how it should be. You know, um, often we'll talk about like in a simple scene that's an argument, which is not necessarily the best idea anyway. It's like people, those scenes go nowhere because everyone wants to win the argument. Why? Because we want to win the argument in life. But what an improviser should be doing is going, oh, I'm in a disagreement with this character, but or the character's thinking, I want to win. The improviser is thinking, what's dramatically the most interesting solution to this? In which case sometimes it's like, oh, I'm going to lose the argument, right? And then you have to do that for the sake of the scene and for the story, and then putting more into, like, a great way to get emotional depth, more meaning in your work is slow down, and to embrace silence, not long silences, but just enough to let stuff land. And Chekhov was a great genre for that. And I'm going to paraphrase, but in my research, one of the things I came across, which I said over and over to the cast, because I love it, and I think it just applies to that expansion aspect in improv. There was some scholar who was talking about Chekhov's writing and Chekhov's work, and he was more famous as or more well known as a short story writer than as a playwright initially. But the scholar was talking, and he said that one of the things that he loved and enjoyed was, and again, I'm paraphrasing, I think, I can't remember the exact quote, but he said he was fixated with Chekhov's, quote, fascination with the unsaidness. And I think that just opened Chekhov up to me in a way that I was like, wow, he's right. It's not what the people are actually saying to each other. It's what they're not saying to each other, and what's happening between things. Right. And I think what a great improv lesson, to just do that in any scene, and doesn't necessarily have to be, Chekhovian style or whatever. One of the things we talked about with the Four Hearts is, Tony kept, one of the directions Tony gave, which I thought was really wise, and bringing it back to genre, is he said, it's kind of like we're going to kind of do an Albee play, but not do an Albee play, But I think what I got out of that, which is what I'm hoping he intended, was just the depthness of the characters again, and just that the characters are very much alive with whatever it is in their spirit, and not so much about like what they're trying to accomplish or what their living situation is, or trying to get to Africa or wherever it is. Right? It's not this kind of goal plot oriented advancement. It becomes this more expansion in the character. So it's like, rather than playing I'm a husband with a wife, and I want to move to the city and she doesn't want, and I guess it's kind of Green Acres, isn't it? But we have the argument about it. Oftentimes the improvisers would mistake that as that's what your story is about, but the moving part of it is the metaphor. So as with Chekhov, that's almost every title of every Chekhov play is the metaphor, right? The cherry orchard, right? So it's the same thing there. But so rather than focusing on the plot point of conniving to get my wife to move to the city or whatever, it's more about how this decision in its unraveling has hurt me deeply, or destroyed our marriage, or changed our relationship forever. Or leads me or her or somebody else towards revealing something to the rest of the characters. And that's the kind of depth that I think I'm talking about, that the audience gets more interested in, I think. And you need it in pretty much everything. When I'm working with genre and teaching genre in general, I often say, if you watch an action movie, there is always what I call the campfire scene, which is where everyone sits around the fire or breakfast table or something like that. And then they talk about what they have invested in being on the spaceship, in being in, this Western town, in being, and that's that kind of investment that you need, that if you didn't have it, they're just characters, and who cares, right? So yeah, and yes, I would agree, Cynthia. Um, Found objects, yeah, was another form. That's a fun form. It's hard to do. No, I won't say it's hard to do well. It's hard to really understand because we tend to think about the uh, objects, or people when they do it, they tend to make it more about the objects, and it's really more about the object as metaphor. And if you're not familiar with the format, it's you go through your day. So if you're doing the show tonight, you would just walk through your day. And as you walk through your day, there are certain things that you come in contact with. Some of them may have instant meaning to you. Some may not, right? So, like for instance, getting set up for all this, there was a lot of me figuring out technology, and I'm not the most tech guy in the world. So maybe one of these things, maybe my mouse or something would be something I would bring in because this is an object that's really important to me today. Or maybe it's something else. Maybe it's a teacup, or maybe it's a piece of clothing that someone left you or that you think about. Really anything works, but it's a thing, in a way, the object speaking to you in a way that, and this is going to get kind of weird, the object in a way speaking to you, and you are in relationship with the object, but the object has that. It's very much as, if you're familiar with the theologian, scholar, Martin Buber, who it was a huge influence for Paul Sills. Paul Sills loved Martin Buber. And his I and thou is that way. It's not me. I mean, a psychologist might say it's me projecting something onto my computer mouse, but he would say you're really having this relationship with the mouse. And what does that computer mouse, have to say to me? Well, I don't know. It's functional. It works. But on some other level, you're trying to find the connection to it. And that's what the show Found Objects is about, is people bringing in their different objects and talking about what the connection was to them. And then they become symbols, in a way, in people's lives. So someone doing the show with me, so let's say the computer mouse for me represents a sense of being overwhelmed, which at different points today, where I was trying to figure stuff out, I was overwhelmed. So this becomes the symbol of being overwhelmed. Well, it might be that in someone else's story or their life, and their stories about something else, another object, they encounter a moment when they're overwhelmed. Well, then they can come over and use my object as the symbol of that. Or I can go over and give it to them, or hold it over their head, or something like that, about this idea of being overwhelmed. And so it kind of unfolds as the show goes on. And to me, what's interesting is the variety of objects that people bring in, and also the way in which something simple or very ordinary can all of a sudden take on like huge meaning in a way that we don't normally think about it. And I guarantee you, I'll try to guarantee you that whenever I do Found Objects, the next time I see that object from someone else's story, it takes me right back, and I kind of get a deeper emotional connection to it when I see that, a teacup. Oh yeah. And I like to think that that's what the audience is leaving with as well. That the next day when they're having breakfast and they see the teacup or the coffee cup, that all of a sudden they go back to the feeling they were having when they were watching someone on stage sharing from their own life what was going on. So, the playbook. Thank you very much for somebody recommending the playbook. It was a lot of work, and it probably needs an update. But there's so many resources out there now. I'm not sure what the next step is. What I do feel about it is, I can tell you a little story about kind of how it happened, and I'll give you a little tragic fact about it. Well, I'll give you the tragic fact first, because I put it all together, and with help, and people help get games, and then I boiled down and wrote down a bunch of stuff and tried to do it. The tragic part was I was almost done, and this was back in the day when the entire company, we had, I think, one computer, and someone accidentally erased the entire thing, and I was just like crushed. Fortunately, I didn't have a backup copy because, this is back when, floppies were the size of your chest, and didn't think about it. But fortunately, I had some notes and the original outline, so I was able to put it back together. So that's the happy ending. But the reason why it came about was there were a lot of people collecting games and putting them in collections and basically charging for them. And that's fine. You do the work and you put it in there. And a lot of people are saying, well, it's for the commentary and for other stuff. And I get it. I'm not judging one way or the other. But the disappointment to me when I wanted to put it together was not necessarily a love of games, but it was really, I wanted a free resource primarily for teachers, school teachers to have. Because again, going back to that inspiration and nature of where Viola Spawn and Neva Boyd and stuff like that were coming from, I thought, well, this is like ridiculous that, teachers, the only way they're going to be able to do this is if they can buy one of these resources, and not that they were that expensive, but I wanted at least one free resource. And then it took off. And so I'm glad it's still giving. And I would like to shape it up a little bit. If I did it again, I would sort of break out. There are some long forms in it. I'd break those out and maybe do 2 separate ones. But like I said, there are so many resources. One thing I did find, which is still absolutely true, and I know you'll understand exactly what I'm saying, is it was funny to hear about a new game and then go, oh, I'm excited to find out about the game, only to discover it was just called something else. And in some of them, I think we do put the variation in of, like, sometimes known as this. And there are other playbooks that do that, I think, much more thoroughly than I do. But to this day, that happens. I'll hear about a form or I'll hear about something, and I'll not rush. But if I'm in a town where it's happening, I'll go, wow, cool, I want to come see it. And I'll come see it, and I'll go, oh, well, this is this format, or oh, this is that game, but just called something different. So, and yes, NLP, yeah, it crosses over a lot with the world of improv, and there's lots of great resources there. There's so many really great resources for NLP. I mean, well, the list goes on and on. Any psychological thing works well, and then you get those crossovers where the line is very thin, say in the work and writings of somebody like Augusto Boal, or playback. And Boal is pretty consistent. I think he's really quite good. And actually, some of the people around him who studied with him, I think it seems very consistent. Playback seems a little hit or miss, but that's my experience. There are some resources that are great and other resources that are not. And yes, this concept of emotional anchoring, and coming back to that, I mean, what we are is a bundle of emotions. We live this life story, but what we're doing is, how do we feel about it, right? How do we, are we happy? Are we sad? Are we mad? Are we bored? That's more important than literally what I'm doing. I could be sitting on my porch, and that really doesn't say anything in a story other than it's a plot point of a character sitting on a porch. But it's, how do I feel about sitting on the porch? What am I doing while sitting on the porch? How am I, what emotions am I having while sitting on the porch? What am I looking at? Who am I looking at? All that stuff then gives you more information. And so much of it can be left up to the audience. Think about, it happens a lot in movies where a character will have something and they just never explain, kind of like, what was the character looking at, or that kind of thing. They let you fill it in. She must have seen that part of it, even though that's not even in the movie, right? So, but anyway, back to the NLP stuff and all these other resources. And for me, it's sort of like acting books or even improv books. Find ones that speak to you, and then learn to speak that language, because in that, again, you're going to have a deeper understanding for yourself. Because there are techniques and things that happen, or books that are written and things like that I find I can't access them. They're not speaking my language. Not that they're not good books. It's just, it's not for me. So, and that's sort of how I mentioned last time a little bit about the history. When I was working and trying to learn improv, and ended up working these amazing teachers, again, totally kind of by fluke. It just was the time and everything else. but that was my quest to kind of go, all right, now I want to hear it from somebody else, or, and the people I latched onto and really embraced were the people that spoke to me. And I think some of these things outside of improv directly relates to the same thing. So if there's a psychologist or psychology, for me, for instance, I get a lot from the late psychiatrist James Hillman. Some of his books, like Dream in the Underworld, are really fantastic, and they're obviously not about improv at all. They're about psychology, but the way that he talks about it, like one of the things I love, he says, and I'm sure it's not him necessarily saying it, but he uses it a lot in techniques, is the best way with emotions, the best route is through the emotion, not around the emotion. And he used to he's been gone quite a while now, but I remember he used to talk a lot about how and this off topic of improv, but just a brief psychology aside, he said this idea of medicating people, maybe over medicating people, kept people from going through whatever emotional thing they needed to go through, because people were just trying to make it easier for people. I don't think that's always true. I think medication has its applications, but I kind of think about that a lot in our modern culture, that we're always trying to alleviate the problem. And again, in some cases, it's great. Like the situation we're in now, I'd love to alleviate that problem. Cool. And
Ben Hartwig.
Ben Hartwig. Oh, yeah. Thank you for the spirit. Oh, what a compliment. Thanks, Ben. How
much time do you?
And let's see. I think the thing about UP values is, I've been around the group so long, and I've been artistic director for, some would say, too long. So, because I've been doing it artistic directorship since '88, but I've been teaching. When our school started, with great help from Rebecca Stockley, who was living here at the time, and others. It was great. I've been so invested in it for so long that I think, in some way, I've worked from a place where the UP values I try to put out there and try to promote are the values that I have as a performer or director, and also as an audience member. The stuff that I want to see. And oftentimes I'll start there. So, like, what haven't I seen on stage, or what have I not seen done well on stage or executed well? Or as a performer, what would be challenging for me to do, or skill that I'm not strong at that I could improve my skills in? So I obviously don't want to take all of it, because all those great teachers and all those great books and people coming from different traditions and moving to Seattle, I think, have all also rubbed off on the UP values. But where I notice the rubbing of it is actually traveling and teaching. So encountering other people and other groups of different philosophies. And I try to be a very inclusive improviser, which is like, hey, whatever works, great. Rather than kind of going, no, not that. I do have a few pet peeves about no, not that, or that's not what I'm trying to do. But I definitely try to be as inclusive as possible, especially show to show, when the specifics of a show. Sometimes the philosophical things bug me, and I can push back on those a little bit more. But in the company, UP company, for the most part, I think people are, if not in line with it, and maybe even if they don't believe it, they understand it and can speak that. And when I go somewhere else where it's been influenced by something else, oftentimes I'll find myself having to kind of translate stuff if I understand where they're coming from philosophically. Most of the time I do, because I've been around this forever, right? So I've encountered a lot of different things. So in terms of time now, I mentioned in the last discussion, if you watched it, and it's available down there, a little bit about it, and I thought about making this a topic for talk. And if I do another one of these, which I hope I can do, I might use that as my topic. Is just this ongoing frustration with improv and what we're doing. I think it came out last time when somebody asked a question about how we're responding to what's happening now. Um, and if anything, any art form or anything should be able to respond to what's happening now, it should be improvisation. Granted, this form is not the best for improv, and there have been some steep learning curves that I've watched and also gone through myself with our group. So I know it's not. I know it's not easy, but to me, I'm worried that improv has kind of commercialized itself out of any meaning. Um, and that boils down to something that I know we've talked to a lot of people on the list here about. But as we're thinking about is, when you talk to people about improv, what are their first impressions or what are their first images or and to me, I go, there's a reason for that. There's a reason why an audience feels that way, or they feel like, oh, I'm going to go to a stand-up club or whatever it is. And sometimes you are. And shows can be like that. And we do shows like that. But not all the time, another thing I've said to death. So if you've heard it, this will be the millionth one time you've heard it. It's sort of like listening to a song, classical music. Let's say you're a rock and roll person, you're listening to classical music and you just go, wow, music sucks because you just happen to hear that one song that you don't like or that one genre that you don't like. And to me, improv is like that. There are all kinds of different genres of improv, including what we were talking about a little bit earlier, the psychological approach or using emotional work that's not directly improv and applying it to it. So there's lots of different things we can do with improv. And I think the time I'm spending is putting into thinking about that and also trying to think about ways, structures, games to hopefully illustrate it and kind of make a point that there's a lot more here and then meets the eye. And in some ways, the early days, what pops into mind immediately, it was true in England too, but the North American improvisers coming out of the Spolin work in the 50s and stuff. I mean, they were doing cabaret and light entertainment, but it was also the news, and it was also based on life in Chicago or St. Louis or wherever the company was that was doing it. And I feel like we've gotten a little bit away from that. So that's what I put my time into thinking about. And I don't have, I have some ideas and maybe even partial solutions, but I don't have it all, and I won't. I mean, it's not entirely up to me. It's up to all of us. So let's see. Yes, digging back into the roots with notes. Yeah, I have a bunch of notes, and I was just thinking I need to go through them and maybe digitize them, or at least go through there, because that was there's a kind of long story about it, and if you're interested and haven't heard it, contact me and I can try to share it with you. But there were all these pointers that, as an improviser, I was getting offers from the world, from lots of different corners that didn't connect, people who didn't know each other, the workshops and the way shows were, developing and things like that. That just all these offers that made me go back to kind of square one. And fortunately, because I have a lot of history here, I was able to go to the good old bookshelf and dust off that folder that I hadn't looked at in decades. And it was like opening a treasure chest. It was like, oh my God, right. Oh yeah, what happened to that? That kind of stuff. And it really got me re-energized. The first thing that happened in it before all this stuff started falling into place was a few years ago. I was in Sweden working with Stockholm Improvisational Theater for the festival, the Dig Festival that Per Gottfridsson puts together. And the theme that he posed, which I still work with, is moving forward by looking back. And and I thought, wow, that's really great. And then that tied into like the image of from Improv, John Stone's Improv about the improviser being, um, walking backwards into the future. Um, and and it's all over. It's in the world too. Phrases like that, and then all of a sudden, all this stuff like rain just began falling more and more and more, and that all those offers took me back. So if you have lots of notes, I'd say take the time to go through them and see what you've forgotten, see what you missed, see what you didn't get at the time, but you wrote it down or typed it in. And now that you have more experience, you can go back and go, oh, now I get it. Because that happened a lot too, where I was just like, I remember not getting this. And that now reading and going, oh yeah, of course, or not appreciating it even. And some kids say, what? Nah, it's not, And then all of a sudden became about appreciating it more. Do a couple more here, and then we'll. And well, thank you, Cynthia, for the compliment. I like to think that that's what I'm trying to do. I was trying to be responsive to the people who are in the company and that come into it. In the same way that when I'm traveling and teaching, it's a lot about trying to find out what the groups need, right? So, uh, oh, that'll be easy. Yeah, stop climate change with improv. Yeah, that's how we'll do it. Yeah, it was. Well, what's funny is not. It's not funny. But I came across something today that I guess was reposted because apparently it's old about the Pope of all people coming out and saying perhaps COVID is nature's response to climate change. And, wow. And one from the Pope, like crazy. And at least for me, lapsed Catholic here. But it's that idea of, the simple improv thing. It's an offer. And yeah, it might not be true, but it's worth considering because then it gets our minds, collective mind, the group mind, right, that we also have in improv, maybe focused on a situation, and I think that is sort of maybe part of our improvisers' responsibilities. And this is me only. I know there are lots of other philosophies around it. But I always go to the old court jester idea again of the court jester is the only one that can make fun of the very important, wars and things that were going on in the kingdom, who could make fun of those things without being killed by the king. And maybe we're in some ways that person, definitely here. And I'm sure around the world, that's the response I've seen, like from late night comedians and things like that, has been to try to like call the BS and just put it there. And people can take it in, not take it in. They can believe it. They cannot believe it. They can turn off the TV. They could not come to our shows, but I would love to see us doing a little bit more. So I do think it has some room. And if you can do it with humor, as a jester does, it makes it easier, but we're maybe in a place where, well, hopefully it's not too late. I'm hopeful about it. Anyway, wow, guys, thank you so much for coming in. This time flies by. And I love talking about this stuff. So, and the questions were great. Like I said, if you want to follow up, contact me. Most of you know how to get a hold of me. If not, just go through the Unexpected Productions page. We're doing shows. We're starting to do shows. We have our Wednesday duo show. This week it'll be a live show. Thursday we're doing some blend of medium and long form with our Improv Anonymous cast. Friday we're doing improv market experiments. And then Saturday we're going to be doing other experiments. It's kind of one-offs that we're going to be looking at. And there'll be more of these Q&As. And again, I'll be coming back sometime soon as I can get my schedule all together with all these people to do some sort of one-on-one interviews with people about improv in their community and just kind of talking shop, and you get to eavesdrop and ask questions and stuff like that. So there's all that kind of stuff. You can find it through our Facebook page as well as unexpectedproductions.org. And if you enjoyed this, thank you so much for your time. If you'd like to make a donation, there's a donation button here somewhere, and I think Ken will be sending something out. There it is. So anyway, be well, stay healthy, be smart about it, read more improv books, and again, cheers. Take care.